When the divorce left her with nothing but a box of old papers, she thought her life was over. But a forgotten key and a faded property deed would lead her to a remote cabin and a secret her father had kept for 20 years. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom, stick with me. This story is for you. Hit that subscribe button because we're about to rebuild from the ground up. The last box was the worst. It wasn't heavy, not with things, anyway. It was heavy with the weight of capitulation. I slid the packing tape across the top, the screech of the adhesive a final, pathetic protest in the echoing emptiness of the foyer. This house, our house, was no longer mine. It was his. Mark's. The court had made that very clear. The polished hardwood floors I'd chosen, the soft gray paint on the walls I'd rolled on myself, the ridiculously expensive chandelier he'd insisted on that I'd secretly grown to love. All of it belonged to him now. He got the assets. I got the memories, and even those felt tainted, like evidence from a crime scene. My lawyer, a woman with a kind face and exhausted eyes, had called it a standard asset division. It felt more like a surgical removal of my life. Mark's business was a complex web of LLCs and partnerships I'd never been encouraged to understand. He'd proven, with stacks of paper and a smug, silver-haired attorney, that everything we'd built was an extension of his pre-existing capital. My contributions, the years I'd spent managing our home, hosting his clients, editing his proposals until 3 a.m, were dismissed as the non-financial contributions of a supportive spouse. I was a supportive spouse. And now I was a supportive ex-spouse, supporting his right to keep everything. I was left with my car, which was technically in my name from before the wedding, my personal effects, and a settlement so meager it would barely cover 6 months' rent on a shoebox apartment in the city. And this last box, it was a dusty cardboard banker's box that had lived in the attic of every place I'd ever been, a silent passenger through my life's chapters. My dad had given it to me on my 18th birthday. "This is your emergency kit, Sparrow," he'd said, his voice rough with a love he rarely spoke aloud. "Hope you never need it." I'd laughed, assuming it was full of old photos and sentimental junk. I'd hauled it from dorm room to apartment to this very house, but I'd never once opened it. In the whirlwind of young love and building a life with Mark, I'd forgotten it existed. Until now, when I was clearing out the attic, a place I hadn't been in years, I saw it tucked under the eaves, covered in a fine gray dust. It was the only thing up there that was unequivocally mine. Mark watched me from the doorway of his new, spacious life, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. He had an expression I'd come to despise, a placid, almost bored pity. "Still clearing out your little trinkets, Alara?" he asked. His voice was smooth, reasonable. It was the same voice he'd used to convince me to sign the prenup, the same voice he'd used in therapy to explain how my emotional instability was the root of our problems. I didn't answer. I just hefted the box. It wasn't heavy, but I pretended it was, grunting a little for effect. Let him think it was full of worthless, heavy things. Let him think he'd won so completely. Because he had. In every practical, legal, and financial sense, he had stripped me down to the studs. He'd taken the furniture, the art, the savings, the future we were supposed to have. He'd even taken the dog. A golden retriever named Gus, who was technically a gift to me, but the microchip was registered to Mark's credit card. Another oversight. My life had been a series of devastating oversights. "Just this last one," I said, my voice flat. I refused to let it shake. I walked past him, avoiding his gaze, the scent of his cologne, the same one I'd bought him for our last anniversary. A final, bitter insult. I loaded the box into the trunk of my 10-year-old sedan, next to 2 suitcases and a duffel bag that contained the entire curated collection of my 28-year-old life. The engine turned over with a familiar, weary groan. As I pulled out of the driveway, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. The house looked perfect, serene, a monument to a life that had never really been mine. Mark was already gone from the doorway. He had probably already turned on the television, his feet up on the ottoman I had spent a month searching for. The thought didn't even hurt anymore. It was just empty, a hollowed-out space where a feeling used to be. I drove to my friend Sarah's apartment, the city lights blurring through the unshed tears in my eyes. Her place was a tiny one-bedroom, and her couch was to be my home for the foreseeable future. She was a saint, wrapping me in a hug and handing me a glass of wine before I could even set my bags down. "You're free," she whispered in my ear. It didn't feel like freedom. It felt like falling without a net. Later that night, long after Sarah had gone to bed, I sat on the floor of her living room, the city humming a restless lullaby outside the window. The box sat in front of me. Dad's emergency kit. My father had been a quiet man, a carpenter who spoke more with his hands than his mouth. He could build anything from a block of wood, but could barely assemble a sentence to express his feelings. He died 2 years ago, a sudden heart attack that had left a hole in my world I still stumbled into. He'd never liked Mark. He never said it, not in so many words, but I saw it in the way his shoulders tensed when Mark talked about his investments, the way his eyes would go flat and distant. I dismissed it as old-fashioned protectiveness. Another oversight. My hands trembled as I sliced through the old tape with a kitchen knife. The cardboard flaps sighed open, releasing the scent of old paper and cedar. On top was a small, hand-carved wooden bird, a sparrow, my father's nickname for me. Beneath it, nestled in a bed of what looked like yellowed newspaper clippings, was a thick, sealed manila envelope. My name was written on the front in his familiar, blocky handwriting. "For my sparrow, when you need to fly." My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just sentimental junk. This was a message, sent from the past, arriving at the precise moment of impact. I slid my finger under the flap, tearing it open. Inside, there were 2 things. The first was a heavy, ornate iron key, the kind you see in old movies, cool and solid in my palm. The second was a document, folded into a neat square. A property deed. I unfolded it carefully, the paper so brittle it threatened to crumble. It was a deed for 5 acres of land in a place I'd never heard of, Stone Creek, a township in the northernmost, wildest part of the state. And there, on the line designated for the owner, was my name, Alara Maeve Collins. My maiden name. The document was dated the day I was born. For a long moment, I just stared at it. It made no sense. My dad was a carpenter. He'd never had money for extra land. We'd always lived in a modest rental house in the suburbs. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of novelty gift, a joke I didn't understand. But the document was embossed with an official-looking seal. The key felt real. My name was right there, printed in stark, undeniable black ink. A place no one could ever take from me. The words from his letter echoed in my mind. A ghostly whisper from a man who had seen this day coming, somehow. He had built me an ark, 28 years ago, and I was only just now realizing I was in the middle of a flood. I spent the next hour on my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my tear-streaked face. Stone Creek was real. It was a tiny, unincorporated community hours from anywhere, nestled in a region of dense forests and granite hills. An online satellite map showed a swath of green, bisected by a few thin gray lines representing roads. I typed in the plot number from the deed. A small red pin dropped onto a patch of dark green, accessible only by a road that seemed to dissolve into the trees. There was no structure marked, just land. 5 acres of trees and rock and forgotten earth, all in my name. Mark had taken everything he could see, everything he knew existed. His lawyers had been meticulous, combing through bank accounts, investment portfolios, and assets. But they could never have found this, because I didn't even know it existed. It was a secret kept for my entire life, a gift I never knew I had received, a place to fly to. I looked at the key in my hand. I looked at the meager pile of my belongings. I looked at the lumpy couch that was my temporary bed. There was nothing for me here, in this city, in this life that had been so thoroughly dismantled. Backwards was not an option. Sideways felt like stagnation. The only direction left was forward, into the complete and terrifying unknown. The next morning, I told Sarah my plan. She thought I was crazy. You're going to drive hours into the middle of nowhere to find a piece of land that might not even be real, based on a piece of paper from a dead man. She said it with love, with genuine concern lacing her voice. What if there's nothing there? What if you get stuck? What if there is? I countered, my voice stronger than I expected. Sarah, there is nothing for me here. I have to see. It's the only thing he left me. The only thing that's truly mine. I think she saw the shift in my eyes, the flicker of a pilot light that had been extinguished for months. The numbness was receding, replaced by a desperate, electric hum of purpose. She didn't argue anymore. She just made me a thermos of coffee, packed a bag of sandwiches, and made me promise to call her the second I got a signal. The drive was long, a slow peel away from the familiar. The 6-lane highways gave way to 2-lane country roads, and those eventually narrowed into winding asphalt ribbons that hugged the curves of the hills. The farther I went, the more the trees seemed to press in on the road, their leaves forming a dense canopy overhead. The air changed, growing cooler, smelling of damp earth and pine. It was the smell of my father's workshop. I passed towns that were little more than a gas station and a post office. Cell service vanished an hour before my GPS told me I was close. I was navigating by a printed-out map now, my finger tracing the final, thin line of a road named Whisperwind Lane. The name sounded like something from a fairy tale. Whisperwind Lane turned out to be less of a lane and more of a suggestion. It was a gravel track, rutted and overgrown, that snaked away from the main road and plunged directly into the forest. My sedan complained, its low clearance scraping against the high center of the road. Twice, I had to get out and drag fallen branches out of the way. My heart was pounding, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. This was insane. Sarah was right. I was chasing a ghost into the woods. I was about to turn back when I saw it. A rusted metal gate, half swallowed by ivy, hanging crookedly between 2 massive stone pillars. A small, weathered wooden sign was nailed to one of the pillars. The letters were faded, but I could just make them out. The Sparrow's Nest. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the whisper of the wind through the pines. It was real. He had named it for me. I got out of the car, my legs unsteady. The gate was chained shut with a heavy, rusted padlock. I looked at the iron key in my hand. It was too ornate, too old-fashioned for a modern padlock. My hopes sank. Of course, it was locked. I was stuck on the wrong side of the final barrier. I kicked at the gate in frustration, and to my surprise, it swung inward with a groan of protest. The chain was just draped over the top, the lock hanging open, a silent invitation. It hadn't been truly locked in years. I drove the car through and parked it in a small clearing just inside the gate. The rest of the way, I would have to walk. The track continued, but it was even more overgrown here, more a path than a road. I started walking, the air growing thick and still as I moved deeper into the woods. The light filtered down through the leaves in shifting, dappled patterns. And then I saw it. Through a break in the trees, perched on a small rise overlooking a gully, was a cabin. It was small, made of dark, weathered logs, with a steep-pitched metal roof that was starting to show patches of rust. A stone chimney stood sentry at one end. A wide, covered porch ran the length of the front, its boards sagging in a few places. Windows, filmed with years of dirt, stared out like cloudy, vacant eyes. It wasn't abandoned, it was asleep, waiting. I walked up the 3 stone steps to the porch, my footsteps loud in the profound silence. The front door was solid oak, bleached gray by the sun and rain. In the center was a heavy iron lock plate, tarnished with age. I held up the key. It looked like it was made for this door. With a trembling hand, I slid it into the keyhole. It fit perfectly. I turned it, and with a deep, satisfying clunk, the lock disengaged. I pushed the door open. It swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing the darkness within. A wave of cool, musty air washed over me, the scent of cold stone, old wood, and time itself. I stepped across the threshold, from one life into another. The inside of the cabin was a single large room, choked with shadows. The only light came from the open door behind me, cutting a bright rectangle across the dusty floor. As my eyes adjusted, shapes began to emerge from the gloom. A large stone fireplace dominated the far wall. A simple wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center of the room. A bed was tucked into one corner, a lumpy shape under a thick canvas drop cloth. Everything, every surface, was covered in a ghostly white sheet, protecting the furniture from the dust of forgotten years. It was a time capsule. Someone had prepared this place, locked it up, and walked away, intending to return. I walked to the nearest window and struggled with the latch. It finally gave way with a groan, and I pushed the wooden sash open. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating a million dancing dust motes. I pulled the sheet off the table. The wood beneath was pine, solid and clean. I did the same with the chairs, the bed, a small kitchenette area tucked against one wall. There was a hand pump for water over a dry sink and a small, pot-bellied wood stove for heat. It was rustic, primitive even, but it was solid. The log walls were chinked tightly. The floorboards were level. My father had built this. I could feel him in the sturdy joinery, in the simple, functional design. This was the work of his hands. On the mantelpiece above the fireplace, another object waited for me. A tin box, the kind that old-fashioned biscuits came in. Inside was a bundle of waterproof matches and 3 thick tallow candles. I lit one, its small flame pushing back the shadows, making the small space feel warmer, safer. Next to the matches was another envelope, this one unsealed. I picked it up. It was the letter from the banker's box, the one addressed for my sparrow, when you need to fly. I had been so focused on the deed that I'd stuffed the letter in my pocket and forgotten about it. Now, in this place he had built, it was time to read his words. I sat down at the table, the flickering candlelight making the shadows dance. My hands shook as I unfolded the single sheet of paper, covered in his familiar, slightly clumsy script. My dearest sparrow, it began. If you are reading this, it means you needed to fly. I am sorry for that. I am so sorry for whatever pain led you here. I built this place for you, for this exact reason. I never wanted you to need it, but I knew the world could be a hard place, and I wanted you to have a soft place to land, a nest that no one could ever tear down. I had to stop, my vision blurring. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and kept reading. I bought this land with the last of the money I had after my business went under, before you were born. It was a hard time. I felt like a failure, like the world had chewed me up and spit me out. I came up here to hide, to lick my wounds. But instead of hiding, I started building. I felled every tree myself. I laid every stone in that fireplace with my own 2 hands. And with every log I set in place, I felt myself getting stronger. I was building this cabin, and in return, it was rebuilding me. The day you were born, I put it in your name. Legally, it has been yours your entire life. A secret savings account made of wood and stone. The letter continued, and the next part hit me like a physical blow. I know this will be hard to hear, Alara, but I have to say it. I never trusted that boy, Mark. I saw a hunger in his eyes that had nothing to do with love. He came to me once, years ago, asking me to invest in one of his schemes. He was charming, persuasive. He promised massive returns. But I saw the rot in it. It was all smoke and mirrors. When I said no, he got cold. Just for a second. The mask slipped, and I saw the man he really was. A man who sees people as things to be used. I tried to warn you, in my own clumsy way, but you were in love, and I knew you wouldn't hear it. So I did the only thing I could think of. I kept my secret. I kept this place safe for you, for the day his mask slipped for good. I dropped the letter on the table, a sob escaping my lips. He had known. All this time, my quiet, reserved father had seen the truth of the man I had married. He had seen the cliff I was running towards, and instead of trying to grab me, which he knew would fail, he had gone to the bottom of the canyon and built a nest to catch me. The depth of his love, his foresight, was staggering. It was a love so profound and patient it had waited 28 years to reveal itself. I cried for a long time. I cried for my own blindness, for the years I had wasted on a man who had never truly loved me. I cried for the father I had never fully understood, for the quiet, fierce protector who had been watching over me from a distance, even after his death. I cried for the lonely girl I had been and the broken woman I had become. I cried until there were no tears left, just a raw, aching emptiness. The last line of the letter seemed to shimmer in the candlelight. Everything you need to start over is rooted here. Look beneath the hearth where the warmth begins. The hearth. I crawled over to the massive stone fireplace, my knees protesting against the hard wooden floor. The hearth was a single, massive slab of granite, cool to the touch. It looked solid, immovable. I ran my hands over its surface, then along the edges where it met the floorboards. Nothing. No seams, no cracks. I pushed against it. It didn't budge. Maybe he was being metaphorical. Maybe the warmth was the feeling of being here, the knowledge of his love. But my father was a carpenter, a practical man. He didn't deal in metaphors. He dealt in measurements and levels and plumb lines. If he wrote, "Look beneath the hearth," he meant it literally. I examined the stones surrounding the fireplace, the ones that formed the foundation of the chimney. They were fitted together with mortar, solid and gray. But one, down near the bottom right corner, seemed different. The mortar around it was a slightly lighter shade, and it looked newer, less weathered than the rest. I pressed my fingers against it. It felt solid. I pushed harder, and then I felt it. A slight give, a tiny shift. My heart hammered in my chest. I scrambled over to the woodpile near the door and found a small iron poker. Using its tip, I wedged it into the thin crack around the stone and pried. The mortar crumbled, and with a scraping sound, the stone came loose. It was a false front, hollowed out at the back. I reached into the dark cavity behind it. My fingers brushed against cold, hard metal. I pulled it out. It was a small, heavy lockbox, the kind used for petty cash. It was locked with a simple key lock, and taped to the top of the box was a small, brass key. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. It turned with a small click. I lifted the lid. Inside, my breath hitched. It was full of cash. Stacks of it, bundled in paper bands. Mostly 20s and 50s. I didn't count it, not then, but it was a lot. More money than I had ever seen in one place. Beneath the money was another, smaller envelope and a thin, leather-bound journal. I opened the envelope. The note inside was short, written in the same steady hand. This is seed money, Sparrow. Not a fortune. Don't let it sit. Plan it wisely. Make something grow. The journal is my story. The parts one never knew how to say out loud. Read it when you're ready to understand why I built this place and why I had to hide it. Be brave. Your loving Dad. I sat back on my heels, the lockbox in my lap, the weight of it both a burden and an anchor. This was it. This was the emergency kit. Not just a shelter, but the means to rebuild. He had given me a place to stand, and now he had given me the tools to build from it. The choice was no longer theoretical. It wasn't just about staying in a rustic cabin for a few days to clear my head. This money, this place, it was a foundation. I could run back to the city, to Sarah's couch, and use this money to get a small apartment, to start over in the world I knew. Or I could stay. I could stay here, in the middle of nowhere, in this dusty, silent cabin, and build a life from the ground up, on the foundation he had laid for me. I looked around the room, at the ghost-white sheets still covering some of the furniture, at the thick layer of dust on the floor, at the cobwebs hanging like macabre chandeliers from the rafters. It was daunting. It was terrifying. It was a mountain of work. But for the first time in a very, very long time, it felt like my own. My own choice. My own work. My own life. I sat there on that dusty floor, completely broken and somehow, miraculously, whole again. And maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you're there right now, sitting in the wreckage of a life that didn't turn out the way you planned. If this is hitting you, I just want you to take a breath with me. This community, this channel, it's for people who get back up. It's for people who find a loose stone and have the courage to see what's behind it. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a moment, a discovery, a letter from the past that changed everything. Your story matters here. It really does. The first few days were a blur of hard, physical labor. My body, accustomed to a sedentary city life, screamed in protest. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know were possible. My hands, soft and manicured just a week ago, were now scratched, blistered, and stained with dirt. But with every ache, with every blister, I felt something solidifying inside me. The fog of grief and helplessness was beginning to burn off under the heat of pure, focused effort. I started with the basics. Survival. The hand pump in the kitchen was my first challenge. I worked the handle for what felt like an hour, the dry squeaking the only sound, until finally, with a guttural gurgle, a trickle of rusty water sputtered from the spout. I kept pumping, my arm burning, until the water ran clear and cold. I had never tasted anything so sweet. That small victory felt monumental. I had water. I could stay. Next was the inside of the cabin. I dragged every piece of furniture out onto the porch, pulling off the dusty sheets and letting them air out in the sun. I swept the floors, clouds of dust billowing out the open door. I scrubbed every inch of the walls and floors with a bucket of creek water and a stiff brush I found in a small lean-to out back. I cleaned the grime from the windows, and suddenly the room was flooded with green, dappled light. It wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was becoming a space. My space. The small town of Stone Creek was a 15-mile drive away, a journey I made in my dusty sedan, feeling like an explorer returning to civilization. The town was little more than a main street with a diner, a post office, a hardware store, and a small grocery. The people were quiet. They watched me with a kind of reserved curiosity. I was clearly an outsider. In the hardware store, a cavernous, wonderful place that smelled of sawdust and metal, I met the owner, a man named George. He was old, with a face like a topographical map and hands that looked like they'd been carved from oak. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low grumble. He didn't smile. "I hope so," I said, handing him a list I'd made. "I need, well, a lot of things. Cleaning supplies, some basic tools, maybe some advice on how to fix a leaky roof." He glanced at my list, then up at me, his gaze lingering on my city clothes and clean hands. "You staying at the old Collins place?" he asked. It wasn't really a question. I was taken aback. "How did you know?" He gave a short, dry chuckle. "Ain't no one been up Whisperwind Lane in 20 years. A car goes up, a car comes down, people talk. Especially when the car looks like it don't belong." He looked me up and down. "Your father was a good man. Quiet. Kept to himself. But he always paid cash and knew his way around a piece of lumber." "You his daughter?" "Yes," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "I'm Alara." "George," he grunted, and then he turned and began pulling items from the shelves, his movements economical and precise. He gave me advice on the roof patching compound, sold me the best quality tools for the price, and even threw in a box of old rags for free. "Your dad bought his tools here," he said as I paid, using a few crisp bills from the lockbox. Good to see the place getting some attention. It wasn't a warm welcome, not exactly, but it was something better. It was an acknowledgement, a thread of connection to my father, to this place. My next stop was the lawyer's office. It was a small shingle hanging outside a clapboard house just off Main Street. Gable and Son, attorneys at law. Inside, a woman with a magnificent beehive hairdo looked up from her crossword puzzle. Mr. Gable, it turned out, was the son, a man now in his late 60s with kind, watery eyes behind thick glasses. His father had been the one to handle the original deed filing for my dad. I sat in a worn leather chair across from his massive oak desk and explained my situation, sliding the original deed across to him. He studied it, holding it up to the light. "Well, he murmured. "I remember my father talking about this. Said your dad was a strange bird. Came in one day, paid cash for that parcel from the old logging company, and had him draw this up. Put it in his newborn daughter's name. Said it was fire insurance." "Fire insurance?" I asked. "His words," Mr. Gable said, a small smile playing on his lips. "Insurance against life catching fire." He was a smart man. "This deed is ironclad, Miss Collins. Registered to you, in your maiden name, free and clear. There's no mortgage, no lien. The property taxes have been paid automatically every year from a trust account he set up. The account still has a few $100s in it. As far as the law is concerned, this land and whatever is on it has been yours and yours alone since the day you were born. Your divorce has no bearing on it whatsoever. It was never a marital asset." The relief was so immense, so profound, it felt like I could float out of the chair. It was real. It was mine. Safe. Untouchable. "Your father was thinking ahead," Mr. Gable continued, folding his hands on his desk. "A long way ahead. You don't see that kind of foresight much anymore. He gave me the name of a reliable local contractor for the roof and a well specialist, just in case. He charged me a nominal fee for his time and told me to call if I needed anything else." As I left his office, I felt another layer of fear slew off. I had legal standing. I had allies, however gruff or formal. I wasn't just a squatter in the woods. I was a landowner. I was home. The weeks turned into a month, then two. A routine emerged, dictated by the sun and the length of my to-do list. I woke with the dawn, the cool morning air a sharp, clean shock to my system. I worked all day, patching the roof, sanding and refinishing the floors, clearing the overgrown brush from around the cabin. I learned to use a handsaw, a hammer, a drill. I learned the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. I learned that physical exhaustion was a powerful anesthetic for a broken heart. In the evenings, I would build a small fire in the fireplace, its crackle and pop a comforting companion in the immense quiet of the woods. I would eat a simple meal, canned soup, or bread and cheese from the store in town, and I would read. I hadn't opened my father's journal yet. I wasn't ready. I felt like I had to earn it somehow, to prove that I was worthy of his final story. So I read old paperbacks I found in a box in the loft, losing myself in other people's worlds. Slowly, the cabin transformed. I painted the interior walls a warm, creamy white, which made the small space feel bright and open. I bought a comfortable mattress in the nearest big town and a set of soft flannel sheets. I found a local potter and bought a few mismatched, handmade mugs and bowls. Small things, but they were my things. Chosen by me, paid for with my own money, placed in my own home. I was, for the first time in my adult life, curating a space that was entirely my own, with no one else's taste or opinion to consider. It was intoxicating. One crisp autumn evening, after a long day of splitting firewood, a task I was finally getting the hang of, I decided it was time. The cabin was warm and cozy. A stew I'd made simmered on the small propane stove I'd bought. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in the comfortable armchair I'd found at a second-hand store, and opened my father's journal. His handwriting was the same as in the letters, but the words were different. They were raw, unedited, the unfiltered thoughts of a man in pain. The journal started just after his carpentry business had failed, the victim of a crooked partner and a bad economy. He wrote about the shame, the feeling of letting everyone down, especially my mother and me. He wrote about the sleepless nights, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. I came up here to the land because I couldn't stand the pity in everyone's eyes, he wrote on one of the first pages. I told Mary, your mother, I was going camping. In reality, I was running away. I sat in a tent for 3 days in the pouring rain, feeling sorry for myself. On the 4th day, the sun came out, and I looked at the trees, these huge, silent giants that had been standing here for 100 years. They didn't care about my failed business. They didn't care if I was a success or a failure. They were just here, and I realized I could be too. I could just be. He chronicled the building of the cabin in painstaking detail. He wrote about learning to fell the trees, the terror and exhilaration of the first one crashing to the ground. He wrote about wrestling the foundation stones into place, his back screaming, his hands raw. He wrote about the day he finally got the roof on, just before the first snow fell, and how he sat inside, dry and safe, and wept with relief. He wasn't just building a structure. He was healing himself. Every notched log was a piece of his confidence being put back in place. Every nail driven home was an affirmation of his own strength. He poured all his pain, his frustration, and his quiet, enduring love for his family into these walls. And then I came to the entries about Mark. It was years later. I was in college, bringing him home for the first time. He's smooth, my father wrote. Too smooth. He looks at Alara like she's a beautiful thing he's just acquired. He looks at me like I'm a piece of old furniture he has to be polite to. There's a hollowness in his eyes. I hope she sees it. But she's so happy. How can I tell her that her happiness feels like glass? And he's a man holding a hammer. Reading those words was like a knife in my gut. He had seen it all. He had seen the truth from the very beginning. His quietness hadn't been disapproval of me. It had been a desperate, helpless love, a fear of shattering the fragile happiness he saw I was so desperate to have. He hadn't been distant. He had been standing guard. The journal ended only a few weeks before he died. The last entry was short. Had coffee with Sparrow today. She seems tired. The light in her eyes is a little dimmer. This marriage is wearing on her. I can see it. But she's strong. Stronger than she knows. The nest is still waiting, just in case. I hope she never finds the key. I closed the journal, my tears dripping onto the worn leather cover. The grief was immense, but it was a different kind of grief now. It wasn't just the pain of his absence. It was the profound, aching beauty of his presence. He was here, in the walls, in the hearth, in the quiet strength I was discovering in myself. This cabin wasn't an inheritance of property. It was an inheritance of resilience. It wasn't a house. It was a lesson in how to build a home, both outside and in. It was the place where my father had rebuilt himself, so that one day, I could do the same. One afternoon, my phone rang. I was outside, stacking the last of the firewood for the winter, and I had my phone propped on a stump, playing music. I was so surprised to hear it ring. The signal was spotty at best, that I almost dropped the log I was holding. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. Hello. Alara. The voice was slick, familiar, and utterly unwelcome. It was Mark. My blood ran cold. How did you get this number? I asked, my voice tight. It was a new number, a new phone, a pay-as-you-go burner I'd bought in town. It wasn't easy, he said, a smug little chuckle in his voice. I have my ways. Listen, I heard a rumor. Something about you inheriting some old shack up in the mountains from your dad. Is that true? I could picture him perfectly, sitting in his expensive leather office chair, one hand swirling a glass of scotch, sniffing around for any last asset he might have missed. The old me would have been intimidated, flustered. But the woman standing in the crisp autumn air, with calloused hands and sawdust in her hair, was not the old me. I have a cabin, I said, my voice calm and even. I was surprised by my own composure. Right, a cabin, he said, the word dripping with condescension. Look, I know things were messy, but if there's any value in the property, you know, legally, as it was willed to you while we were married. I cut him off. It wasn't willed to me, Mark. It's been in my name since the day I was born. It was never a marital asset. It was never yours. It has nothing to do with you. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he processed this information, as he realized this was a door that was well and truly closed to him. Well, he said finally, his voice losing its predatory edge and becoming flat. Just thought I'd check. No need to be hostile. I'm not being hostile, I said, and a small, genuine smile touched my lips. I'm just being clear. Goodbye, Mark. And I hung up. I ended the call. Just like that. I stood there for a long moment, the phone in my hand, the silence of the woods rushing back in to fill the space his voice had occupied. I felt no anger, no sadness, no regret. I felt nothing at all for him. He was just a ghost, a voice from a life that no longer belonged to me. I had hung up on my past. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air, turned back to my woodpile, and got back to work. There was still so much to build. Winter arrived, blanketing the world in a thick layer of silent, pristine white. The first heavy snow was both terrifying and beautiful. I was truly isolated now, the gravel lane impassable even for a four-wheel drive, let alone my old sedan. But I was prepared. My woodshed was full, my pantry stocked with canned goods and dry staples. I had water from the pump and warmth from the fire. For the first time, the solitude didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. Those quiet, snowbound months were a time of deep introspection. With the physical labor of rebuilding the cabin mostly done, the work turned inward. I spent my days reading, writing in my own journal, and taking long walks through the silent, snow-laden woods. I learned the tracks of the deer and the rabbits. I learned the different calls of the winter birds. The world, which had once felt so loud and hostile, was now teaching me a new language, a language of stillness and observation. I thought about my father's lesson. This is seed money, he had written. Plant it wisely. Make something grow. I had used some of it to make the cabin livable, to secure my own survival. But that was just the soil preparation. It wasn't the planting. What was I going to grow here? The answer came to me slowly, piece by piece. I didn't want to go back to the city, back to the life of noise and striving that had left me so hollow. I wanted to stay here, in this quiet place that had saved me. I started researching online, using the satellite internet I'd had installed, my one major concession to modern life. I learned about small-scale organic farming, about heritage seeds, and sustainable agriculture. The 5 acres of land weren't just a buffer of trees. They were a field of possibility. When the spring thaw finally came, melting the snow and turning the world to mud and then to green, I was ready. I used a portion of the remaining money to buy a used rototiller and a mountain of seeds. I spent weeks clearing a half-acre plot of land, pulling stones and roots from the earth until my back felt like it would snap. George, at the hardware store, watched my progress with a critical eye every time I came in for more supplies. One day, he loaded a dozen bags of organic compost into my car, without putting them on my bill. Your dad always talked about putting in a garden, he grumbled, refusing to meet my eye. Hated store-bought tomatoes. Said they tasted like disappointment. It was the nicest thing he'd ever said to me. That summer, I grew things. I planted rows of tomatoes, zucchini, kale, and beans. I watched, with a sense of awe I hadn't felt since I was a child, as tiny green shoots pushed their way up through the dark soil. Tending that garden became my meditation. It was a daily act of faith, of nurturing, of collaboration with the earth. And when I harvested the first ripe tomato, warm from the sun, and bit into it, its taste was explosive, real, and vibrant. It tasted nothing like disappointment. It tasted like hope. My life now is quiet, and it is small, but it is deeply, profoundly my own. I sell my extra produce at a small farm stand at the end of my lane. The locals, who once viewed me with suspicion, are now my regular customers. They call me the cabin girl. They ask for my kale and my heirloom tomatoes. We talk about the weather, about the deer eating their petunias. I am becoming part of the landscape, another feature of this small, forgotten place. My father taught me that what you build with your own hands, what you protect with your own heart, can never truly be taken. This cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was a second chance, gifted to me by a man who loved me enough to plan for my darkest day. He gave me a refuge, but he also gave me the tools and the confidence to build my own life from its foundation. The divorce didn't leave me with nothing. It left me with everything that truly mattered. It forced me to find the one thing that had been mine all along. If you're looking for your own second chance, or just a community that believes in them, make sure you're subscribed. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's not over, that the end of one story is often just the beginning of a better one. And tell me in the comments, what's the one thing, the one place, the one memory that no one can ever take away from you? I'll be reading every single one, because we all have a foundation, a secret nest built just for us. Sometimes we just have to go through the storm to find it.
How are you lasting this long? What food did you eat? I ate the potato hamburger steak, Forrest. Oh, I'm so glad you're feeling better. Thanks, Julie. Me too. Let's just punch that one. We'll take those with us. Okay, perfect. I think there's no... Okay. I was like, I don't remember if there's a ground underneath here. Oh, and thanks for the shares, Julie. Appreciate it. You're always so sweet, Julie. Thank you so much. Oh, and thanks for the lucky lenses, too. Okay. There we go. Oh yeah, best thing to hear as I come in. Glad you're doing better. Oh, hey, Ellie. Good to see you. Okay, take those. There we go. Hi, purple friends. I'm about to pass out. Y'all have a good night. Okay, nerdy. It's great to see you. Hope you have a great night and you sleep well. Okay. Also, guys, I think I'm going to try something on Friday where I stream earlier. Or at least I start the stream earlier on like Fridays. And just stream for like a really long time. We'll see how it goes. Also, because I feel like it'd be nice for like... Oh god, we just fell through. For people like Nerdy and like Ash and other people, because like they're just in a different time zone, so they can't catch it as often. I was like, maybe I'll stream like a couple hours earlier on Friday so that You can like tune in. Your head hurts. I'm actually gonna sleep as well. All right, night, Ishimaru. Good to see you. Also, thanks for the follow, Sandra. Appreciate it. That's so sweet. It kind of gives half to one side of the world and a chance for the others to see the other half. Exactly. So I was like, maybe I'll try that out and see how it works out. Okay.